One autumn afternoon when I was in my early 30s, I had decided to take a ride up to my parents' cabin, up in the Catskills. I wanted to do a quick check on the house before winter. It was early fall, so it wasn't too cold for me to ride a motorcycle, at least during the day. Once the sun sets, the situation would be different. The temperature drops dramatically and the wind chill at highway speeds can lead to frostbite. My plan was to head out early, check the house, make sure everything was secure and ready for the winter, and leave before sundown, while the temperature was still bearable. That was the plan, but that isn't what happened. By the time I had finished and was ready to leave, the sun had just dropped below the horizon, with just the bare minimum of light left before everything would be pitch black. This meant I would have to ride in the dark, with frigid temperatures that I wasn't dressed for. A choice had to be made: take the chance, bear the cold and risk frostbite or worse. Or, spend the night in the cabin. I have spent nights in that cabin before, but only a handful of times, alone. It's just different when you are there alone at night. The cabin's main source of heat is an old wood-burning stove, and there was just enough firewood left to make it through the night, if the temperature dropped too low. But that was the least of my worries. This cabin is located within a region of Catskill State Park in upstate New York. There's no cell service in the immediate area and the cabin doesn't have a landline. There's electricity but no internet, no radio, nothing but your own thoughts to pass the time. I stood next to my bike with the night creeping ever closer and just thought about my options. It was already getting frigid cold and the breeze had that winter bite to it. I let my mind wander for a moment when something snapped me back to reality. The wind passing through barren leafless tree branches has a distinct sound, but mixed in with that familiar sound was something else, something different. I focused and listened carefully. I thought I could hear the sound of distant voices carried with the wind. It was like whispers too quiet to decipher, but too loud to ignore. No one is supposed to be around there, but it didn't really sound like people either. It was strange, like the whispers were being carried by the wind straight to my ears. The more intently I listened, the louder it felt in my ears, and then it felt closer, and all around me. At that point, I had enough and abandoned the idea of spending the night. I decided enduring the freezing ride was the only option. I quickly turned on the bike, using the weak headlights to illuminate the dirt path that led to the main road. I hastily put on my riding gear, except for the full-face helmet. I decided to wait until I was on the main paved road before putting on the helmet, which would obscure my field of vision. It felt like I was running out of time and that I needed to be as alert and aware of my surroundings as possible. I walked the bike to the road entrance, and without looking back, I threw on the helmet, kicked the bike in gear and took off on the main road. The headlight on the bike barely illuminated more than a few feet in front of me. I knew this was a bad idea, but something inside of me said that staying there was a worse idea. Looking back now, it all seemed irrational, but in that moment rational thinking was overtaken by irrational fear. I tore up and down the mountain road heading to the highway entrance ramp. As I put distance between me and the cabin, I could feel a level of relief, but also a feeling that I wasn't quite far enough. I wasn't out of the woods yet. Both figuratively and literally. The cold bit through my gloves at my fingers and the wind managed to get through every gap in my helmet to reach my face, but that would be nothing compared to the cold on the highway. The narrow mountain road made it impossible to safely ride faster than 45 miles per hour. On many sections you needed to slow to 30 miles per hour or less. The highway would be mostly straight, 60 miles per hour, with no windbreaks. As I reached the highway entrance, I slowed to a stop and looked in my mirrors. It was nothing but black void behind me, with just a red glow a few feet behind from the brake light. I didn't know what I expected to see, or that I expected to see anything for that matter. But something felt wrong, as if there was some monstrous thing, just out of sight, just waiting for me to drop my guard. I signaled to turn left and headed onto the highway entrance ramp. The feeling of dread disappeared and soon after was replaced with that unbearable constant cold. I clung to the bike's core, where the engine provided some warmth. Every so often I alternated putting one of my gloved hands alongside the engine to give some tiny level of relief. This pattern lasted almost 2 hours as I rode down the highway, eventually reaching my exit. It would take another 30 minutes of riding through local streets before I would reach home. But there were street lamps and businesses, and residences with people and more lights. Eventually, I pulled into the driveway of my home and entered my kitchen. I immediately soaked my hands in warm water to get the feeling back. I wanted to laugh for putting myself through that ordeal, all because of some irrational fear. But there was nothing to laugh about because even now, as I write this, it feels all too real. I don't know if there really was anything to be worried about, but I'd rather not try to find out for sure.